It was in college, really, because that's where I started doing clay. It just so happened that when I was a freshman, I was in art school and taking foundations courses, and my first work-study job was in the ceramic studio, cleaning out the kiln room. And it just so happened that year they were building a double-chamber wood kiln out in the kiln yard, and I had no idea what a kiln even was, and I was very curious about what they were doing. And so as soon as I could, I took a ceramics class, and then so that was my second year of college. And then as soon as I took that ceramics class, I knew I wanted to do clay, and then I got to fire that wood kiln that same year, and so I've been firing wood kilns ever since then. I don't know why, it just hooked me, just the whole process of getting the wood, preparing for the firing. There's a lot more to think about, because you have to think about how much wood you need, and it takes a lot more pots to load. So I felt like the preparation time was like all this kind of like time and energy and anticipation, and then the firing felt to me really like more of a hands-on way to fire, because you're with the pots the entire time, even though they're in the kiln. It's not like an electric kiln or a gas kiln where you just turn it up and you walk away and the kiln does its thing. With wood firing, you have to be present the whole time. You have to be listening to the kiln, and you have this relationship with the kiln that's unlike, firing any other type of kiln. I just really fell in love with that aspect of it. I got invited to go to Louisiana to a school there called Louisiana Tech. My teacher, Lisa Stinson, my former teacher from where I went to school in Hartford, was there basically building a ceramics department. They had an art school but no ceramics. In exchange for helping her build kilns there, I got to work there and have a studio for a year. So she taught me how to build kilns. Several other former students of hers that were all working on this, and so we built 2 kilns. And then I just really enjoyed the process of building kilns and thinking about, how to design a kiln so that you have the type of kiln that you want. And once I kind of learned the basics, I volunteered myself to anybody who was building a kiln, and then eventually someone asked me if I would build their kiln for them, like just from scratch, and design it and build it. And basically when I started, I didn't design this kiln. I took the Firebox design and the principles of the Firebox and adapted it to the size kiln that I wanted and the type of wood that I would be using and the number of pots I wanted to fire. So, hi. How are you? Good. How is it? This is Genevieve. So my daughter was born, I started planning the kiln. I drew the plans and I gathered material and deciding the kiln that I wanted to build. And then when she was 2, I started building. And what helped me start at that time was I got a NIFA grant from the New York Foundation for the Arts. I had collected a lot of used brick and used material. And so with that grant, I was able to buy the rest of what I needed. So I built this kiln in 2007. And she started daycare. She went to a place like right up the road a couple times a week. So I worked on it while she was at daycare and then on the weekends, and it took me about 6 months. I don't know if it was stupidity or something so I would be motivated. So it was the end of 2007. I scheduled a show for March of 2008, and so I finished the kiln in January and fired in February, and so I could have worked for this show. And it was pretty cold, that first firing. This style of kiln has this external firebox. Generally, it's a Firebox, has straight walls and the arch going over the walls. And I've built several types of this kind of kiln, but they've been like different sizes, and I will build it to whatever the potter wants or needs. As far as wood kilns go, it fires really quickly. Like even though it's 35-hour firing, that's pretty fast. Some kilns will fire for like days, 3 to 10 days. It's not very ashy, like the longer firings and the different types like the anagama firings. You get a lot of ash buildup over days. So this is great for doing like glazed ware and functional stuff. Plus I didn't want to spend days and days firing. Use a lot more wood that way, and it's just so much time. It's already enough time. Because we're out here kind of on the edge of this big field, this big cornfield and hayfield, it feels very much like the seasons are just kind of part of my making cycle. Because of the landscape and because of what's happening out there, like, the different tasks that the farmers are doing out in the fields are all very seasonal. I don't know how my work necessarily relates to the seasons so much as it relates to the cycle of making and selling the work, and how that, I think, more dictates my making and firing cycle. But it happens to coincide nicely with the seasons. So for instance, the pottery tour happens in May, so that means a firing would happen in April. I guess I'm working backwards, but the cycle of making happens after the holidays and throughout the winter.
Look at how she'll do, it'll be round, and then it'll have this little square part to it. I really love that. And is this round or is it square? I love it.
The thing I like about this form is that, how far can I go? How far can I push it? Before, and honestly, like, you really don't have the answer to that question until you push it too far. I've definitely done that. So I will just kind of leave it like this at a nice angle. I leave that there, and then after this is leather hard, I'll turn it upside down and trim all that clay off, and then I'll make the cuts in it with an X-Acto knife. And so then the cuts will go across, up the side and then into the rim a little bit. So yeah, and that form was actually inspired by these images I saw of Philippine-made boats. They were these fishing boats that were like these incredible shapes that went out like this, and they had these fairly flat, I think they were probably flat, like rim all the way around, and I think it was to keep the water from coming in, you know, like if they were splashing around, it was to keep the water from coming over and into the boat. But these beautiful woven structures that I was just, you know, down the rabbit hole of Pinterest one day, I think, and I was like, I've never seen these before. These are amazing. So, but then it makes you, if you do see something like that, it makes you go further to like research what are they, where are they from, how are they made, and I love that, you know, that part of it. Early on in college, I was very fascinated with Korean celadons and Korean ceramics in general, just because their forms were so perfect and beautiful. I had never seen anything like that before. And I tried, my whole senior show was on celadons, and I tested like all these different celadons, trying to get that beautiful jade color, and I could never achieve it, of course. So the pots, or the things that move me the most, are the oldest ceramics from Japan, like the Jomon pottery that was made kind of like very roughly, but obviously had a purpose, whether it be for ritual or cooking. You know, like those old Native American burl bowls that they were made by hollowing out a burl from a tree, which is the gnarliest part of the tree, and they would burn it out and then carve it and then end up with this beautiful form, and then somehow carve handles into it as well. And they were made for, you know, food, preparing food. And they were made of wood, and they lasted, you know, the ones that are in museums now have lasted all these years and have this amazing, beautiful patina on them because of being used. And there's one giant one in the Natural History Museum in New York it's huge. And they would put hot stones in the bottom of the wooden pot, basically, to heat the food in there. So they found ways of using them for cooking, which I found to be incredible. But the forms are amazing, and those, when I discovered that piece in the museum and afterward researched, you know, those bowls and those pieces, like that kind of was like, or still is, fertile ground for me for inspiration with form. It was when I moved to Worcester, Mass in the late 90s, and I was working at the Worcester Craft Center, Worcester Center for Crafts. I worked as a teacher first in the children's programs and the adult ed programs, and then I did that for a year, and then I worked as the studio tech. Before that, I traveled every year. I went to a different place every year, so I was there for 2 years, and I thought, well, maybe I want to take the leap and like go and set up a shop and make pots every day and then sell them. So I guess there was a shift in that, like, okay, now instead of like working a lot of other jobs, now I want to try to make my job, you know, being a potter, or mostly a potter with maybe some teaching and stuff. And that was in 2001. It was difficult because I lived by myself, and I had a house, and Well, I had a wood kiln that I was firing like probably 12 times a year. Like we would fire it almost once a month. Yeah, that was like working like 12 to 14-hour days in the studio. For a long time was a real viable way for potters to make a living. Just doing the craft show circuit and doing galleries. And so you end up having multiple venues where you sell your work, and hopefully that is enough to keep your lights on. And it was amazing. And it also, like, by 4 years into it, I was pretty burned out in doing that. So that's when I met Tom, actually. Moved here in 2004. I was just kind of figuring stuff out, doing shows, and then I guess part of the catalyst for the work I'm making today came from when my daughter was born, really, because before that I was working full-time as a potter, working long days in the studio, going to shows, doing craft shows, as many craft shows as I could with the amount of work that I could make each year. Soon after, I started working at the Corning Community College, and they have a wood kiln, so it wasn't too long of a time that I didn't have access to a wood kiln. But in that time, in working in this new space with a new kind of like future ahead of me, that I knew that things would change because I was going to be having a baby. So I just started making forms that took longer to make. So I was making these big vessel forms. For me, they were big, but they were these vessel forms that were bowls essentially, and they were kind of like thrown and hand built, kind of thrown and coiled, but they were much slower pots. And because I wasn't filling a kiln and I didn't have this crazy show schedule, I was able to make things that I could kind of like work on and then cover and then come back to at a slower pace. So my pace slowed way down, and because of that, I think my work also slowed down. What can I do in the interim before I build my kiln? I have to make a kind of work that I've been wanting to make, but I haven't been able to make because I've had to make like so many cups and so many things that I sell at craft shows. Yeah, like I went to some museums and I looked at these forms that were really moving, like the burl bowls and the Jomon pottery, and really like the Native American section of the Museum of Natural History is just it. I had never been there, and I was just, every time I go back, it's one of my favorite places. So kind of dialing everything back and slowing down. And then when Genevieve was born, I was able to keep going with that, because then I was like really excited about these new forms, and about while she was a baby, I was able to maintain that pace because I could come in here, Tom got home from work, or on the weekends, and I could come in here and just work on one pot and then cover it. And then if I didn't get back out here in 2 or 3 days, it was still there waiting for me. And so in that time period, I was working in Corning, firing their Onagama kiln. I feel like that type of kiln requires a certain kind of pot. I was thinking about like, how can I make vessels that will really take on that surface of the Onagama kiln, which is so different than the kiln that I was used to firing. So that it then furthered the development of those forms that were vessels with the cutout handles. And those cutout handles came directly from those Native American burl bowls that I saw. And it kind of evolved into these basket forms where I was cutting more into the pot and making it really a vessel. Function has always been a good parameter for me to work within, and it gives me structure. So if I were just making sculpture, I think I don't know how I would narrow myself down in terms of what I was making. So having the functional aspect for me gives me a great framework. But it's funny because kiln building is very precise, and it's very like geometric. So you have angles and you have curves coming together. So I do think that maybe carries over into my pots. I never really think about kilns when I'm making pots, like making kilns when I'm making pots, but I think they're related. When I'm thinking about a kiln, I think about it in very just visual terms. I basically draw it out brick by brick and think of it in that way. Like how many brick are going in the floor, and I have the different colors for the different types of brick. I think I'm good with my clients. Making sure that the person who I'm building for has what they want. For instance, David wanted to use as much used material as he could and from his old kiln, and making that happen and in the best way possible so that the kiln is going to be structurally sound.
These have been in 1, 2, 3 kilns. 3 kilns.
So he kept the ones that we could reuse, and you can see the color difference. The ones that have been fired already are this kind of yellowish color. And then the white ones, these are new, and they came from a brick supplier, and they're insulating brick. So the floor and the first 5 courses are hard brick, and that's because you can see where the burner ports are and the flue. Those are the real high heat areas. So the hard brick will withstand that high heat better over time. Those all came from David's old kiln, so they're multicolored, like they've already been used and fired. But it gives it kind of a pretty pattern, I think.
The other kiln was made of bricks that had been with me for 40 years, a lot of them. And they were just getting tired. I think their efficiency was falling off.
Once I got past there, I can use these insulating brick, and they just make the kiln fire really efficiently because they hold the heat in, they insulate it really well, both for temperature gain and then also for cooling. It makes for a nice slow cool, so that's good for the clay and the glazes and everything. David fires with gas. He's been firing with gas, for, 40 years or something like that. So it's important for him to keep doing the same kind of firing.
I mean, I've built several kilns, but they've always been quick and dirty. Well, I've seen 2 other kilns that she built, and they were beautiful, really beautiful. And I decided after 40 years I deserve such a kiln.
So it's really up to the person and how they want to fire and what kind of work they make. Well, so this is a gas kiln, and it is a simple sprung arch, which means the kiln has straight walls and then an arch that will go over the top of it. But I've built all sorts of different kinds of kilns, wood kilns, salt soda kilns, and gas kilns. And I think this might be the 19th or 20th. I should look. But I count that from the very beginning when I first started even learning. Probably this is number 13 at professionally. A lot of women build their own kilns too. So they might in friendly situations or in group situations or just even for money too, but I don't know how many kilns you have to build to call yourself a professional kiln builder. For me, I feel like I can use that title because I know also how to design kilns and how to do a brick count and place a brick order and source material. I have the tools of the trade, the brick saw. A beautiful kiln. Well, I think it's the precision, cleanliness. You know, when you're dealing with cutting the brick and using mortar, using just enough so that it doesn't ooze out and you have globs of mortar. Keeping things level, which is what I'm doing now. Trying to use the mortar in such a way that it's thin. Kind of use it on each course to level the bricks where they need to be leveled. If I don't need to use it, I won't. So if you look at the way that it's stacked, it almost looks like it's dry, like there's no mortar. And that, I think, kind of keeps the kiln looking really clean.
Oh.
It was just an old milking barn that, you know, this was a shed and dirt floor. And he did the whole woodworking on the inside.
Yeah, so we finished off this little milk shed into the studio.
So we got married in 2005, and Tom had just finished renovating the studio.
I am a carpenter by trade.
I had started working in here, but it was nice and new and clean, and so we thought it would be a perfect space to have our wedding. So we got married here.
Get it to start. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to set it on fire. And then... Right, and then we'll throw pots on top of it, and we'll...
Right. I mean, we won't have to split the wood. We can just fire pots that way.
Raccoon. We'll raccoon some pots over to the burning log splitter.
I know, I'm starting to...
I'm sorry. High hopes for the log splitter.
I'm feeling it.
Yeah? Whoa. It almost kicked over.
You appear as this almost like dainty feminine person. but then but you're so like tough, and you do what you want, and you find this way, you have this vision.
Keep the crew fed.
Yes.
Yeah, when they're firing overnight, everybody needs a good hearty meal, because they'll come in and grab a cup of coffee and a handful of chips, and they can't fire that thing for 48 hours straight without a good meal.
It is a lot of redundancy. Thank you, everyone who made things.
A lot of people ask, did you make all of those? It's different in style and this thing.
Good
Genevieve does a dance. Oh, you gotta stand up.
That's what it's all about.
There's the holiday cycle, which, pots need to be kind of ready to go to either a show or to Handwork or to a gallery, before Thanksgiving. So a fall firing would have to happen sometime in September or October. So that means making would happen over the summer. in the summer when the corn and the hay is high and everything is green and it's, beautiful and, days are long and my daughter's out of school. And so there's, it's a little bit more of a laid back kind of time. It feels like there's more time to make work because the days are longer. The ceramics community is pretty small, and the wood firing community is especially small. I joined Handwork in 2013, and that has been really great because it's a community of craftspeople. There are potters, there are fiber artists and jewelers and woodworkers, and it's a cooperative that's been around for over 40 years, and everybody works in the store and pitches in, and we all make decisions as a cooperative. Well, it gives me a few things. One is a large space to display work, and because I don't have that here, I don't have a showroom where I, sell from my studio on a regular basis. And at Handwork, I have a large amount of space where I can keep, a good amount of pieces and a good inventory of pots. If someone's interested in seeing a lot of my work, I can direct them there. It also gives me contact with the community of artists in Ithaca and around Ithaca. We're all working toward the same thing, and that is to keep working as a craftsperson, as an artist. As a community, Handwork, just being around other working artists, the connections that are made there, and then also in working in the store, I get to connect with the community of Ithaca. The locals like to shop there, and it's a great local place to buy handmade, very high quality handmade work. So my color palette is, I try to keep my glazes and slips pretty minimal in that not having too many to choose from. So because with the wood-fired stoneware, the color of the clay is very rich, just without any glaze. My clay tends to be like a dark, earthy brown, and then there's variations of color within just the clay. With glazes, I don't want to kind of overdo it and have the color of the clay and all these different colored glazes. So within the glazes, there's also multiple colors going on, layers of color. For instance, on the stoneware pots, if I use my green glaze, that is like sort of a go-to glaze I use a lot. There's times where it can be just like a very jade color green and very flat looking. And then sometimes, if there's ash, a layer of ash over it, it will have like golden streaks. And it just so happens that the colors that are coming out of my wood kiln are very similar to the colors that I'm surrounded by. And it's not, I didn't set out when I made this color palette, these glazes, to actually reproduce the colors that are around me in nature and in the landscape. But it just sort of, it has happened that way. Like, that green and that gold is very similar to the color of the field at a certain time of year. That yellow slip, depending on where it is in the kiln, sometimes it can look like, the cornfields when they dry out in the fall, and they have multiple tones of yellow and kind of bronze or tan. So it just sort of happens that like my palette is very earthy, and so it represents, or it kind of reflects a lot of the earthiness, that is out here, like in the countryside and out where we live. Anytime you fire with atmosphere, you have variations, you have an element of surprise. Just the nature of the atmosphere in the kiln, which with wood is different depending on so many things because of the wood that you're using, how long it's been drying, what the weather is like outside. So that will affect how the kiln reduces and how the firing goes a lot of the time. Yeah, so as it burns more wood, the coal bed that we're stoking underneath burns the wood up here on the grates. And then eventually we'll stop putting wood down at the bottom and we'll be filling this as much as possible with wood. The goal is to go up about 100 degrees per hour. You have sort of your experience up until now that allows you to place pieces in the kiln with intention and knowing that this area of the kiln is hotter. So I'm going to put a certain glaze or a certain form in this area because this is the hotter part of the kiln. And knowing like the cooler area that, oh, my yellow slip looks beautiful here, so I'm always going to put pots with yellow slip in this area. So having that experience, you're making, like educated decisions, but you're also, and the firing, it's very controlled. It's very thoughtful in that you're not just putting wood on and hope for the best. In my case, I've had years of logging wood firings to know like how it's gonna go and how it should go. But all of that said, putting your pots in an environment that things could happen that you didn't necessarily expect. So there's more of this kind of thing happening with the blue glaze. And that where it's shiny is where the salt hit it. So where it gets like that nice, rich, kind of red. Where the glaze pooled, but it didn't drip under the pot. So see how black that is? It's shiny. But I like it.
Oh yeah.
Like I really like this side actually, where it's like more satiny and feathery.
Your arch form is better than any of mine ever were.
Oh yeah. Well, we have Tom to thank for that because he helped me out a lot. He gave him the dimensions and
I like the fact that it's going to
told
be
him how I wanted it and
taller.
Yeah, I think having some room up there is going to be really nice. So you make some big pieces. Or the arch form is made out of plywood and 2x4s, and it's placed in the kiln to hold up the arch as we're building it. And once the arch is all laid above the form, it gets dropped down, so it's propped up on these shims here. You pull out the shims, the form falls down, and then we pull it out, and then the arch is it's not a freestanding arch, it's sprung arch, but it's getting a little bit buckly from being stored in the barn, but it's okay. It'll work again. One more time, maybe. I had to cut these brick. These are skew brick, and they're cut at an angle to give a spring for the arch to begin. So those brick all had to be custom cut out of soft brick. And once the arch form is in and the skews are in place, you lay one course over to see what the configuration is going to be. So using what's here, we had some 3-inch arch brick, some regular standard 2.5-inch arch brick, and some straights. So it's configured in a way so that they all fit. And then these two, that'll get pounded in, but these two will be the key that kind of, put pressure on both sides to hold everything in place. Once I know that, then I can take this off and then start laying course by course. Grab them and put them in place. Yeah. I have like 2 hoodies on. Brick at a time.
I used to always feel like once I got to the arch, that was the real fun part.
Yes.
To the
Yeah,
edge.
well, it feels
Huh?
very
There's
like
something magical
accomplished.
about doing a good arch. It's
like
just-
there's an accomplishment at this point where, oh yeah, okay, this is the final stages here. Makes me look strong. Yes, I'm the youngest of 8. My parents had 8 kids. No other potters, but there are lots of artistic people in my family. Yeah, lots of creative people and hard workers. New England, hardworking, salty New England parents, and who raised, 8 hardworking children. I didn't really consider myself of any artistic ability when I was young, and I just wasn't that type of kid who was like constantly drawing. And I was more of a daydreamer. I did a lot of just kind of, daydreaming. I was outdoors a lot. I was very quiet. I was very internal. I was a very internal kid. So can you hand me my cup of water? I would draw and write and do all those kinds of things that teenagers do to get through their teenage years. And I never thought of myself as having artistic ability until a teacher suggested that I might. Like in high school, I had an art teacher who, said, maybe you should think about applying to art school. And I was like, wow, that's not something I ever would have thought of for myself. I think I was good at like English and, that kind of thing. And I went to a very small high school. It was just a tiny all-girls school, and we didn't have an art department. There was no clay. There was no, we basically had like drawing and collage, things that like we'd, cut up pieces of magazines and put them together. Miss Moore was her name, and she just, I don't know what it was. She just thought, maybe this would be a good direction for you. So I applied to art school, not thinking that I would actually even be accepted to an art program, but I was accepted and went to the Hartford Art School in Connecticut, and I was just kind of thinking of doing two-dimensional stuff, drawing, painting, printmaking. Working in the ceramic studio as a work-study student, I discovered that there's, a whole ceramics department and, people making pots and making sculpture, and that just, I felt somehow draw like a real pull to that. And then after I took my first ceramics class, I just thought I want to do this forever, for, the rest of my life. So, yeah, here I am.
I'm not worried. So we're going to take the arch form out, huh?
I think you better. What's of it?
How's she looking?
It's looking good.
It's good in there? Okay, hang on, I just want to take a look at it before we... Do you want to just slide it, you think, at this point? Okay.
Congratulations.
You want to go to your car or you want to...
No, I can't fit this in my
Oh,
car.
okay.
So let's just put it up on its end. Just tip it up. There we go.
Nice.
Ah, not bad. Cute. Able to get the back wall and the front walls done tomorrow. And chimney for the winter, so. And it's kind of nice that the new brick are the key because it gives
Yeah.
a nice stripe. And that's aesthetically pleasing. Yeah, I understand the importance of being the first or the only woman to be doing a certain thing, or one of the few. But I don't know. Like, I think of it in terms of like Genevieve's generation, and like generations of women before me have kind of paved the way to allow me and others to do this kind of work so long ago. I mean, so many, and that like I want to honor that, and then at the same time I want Genevieve to be able to feel like that isn't a factor ever in what she's doing. That like she's doing what she's doing because she has the skills and because she has the education and the knowledge, and it's not any remarkable thing that she's a woman in a certain field doing a certain thing, because at some point it should be unremarkable, and that's really what we want to work toward. Oh yeah, this is like a good soup base right here. The last few years, you know. So I don't know. It's new. I have a lot of exploring to do. This was one of my favorite pieces that came out.
Very nice.
So really more geometric and no movement in the glaze or anything like that because of the electric firing and
what cone?
Cone 1. So just playing with like different color underglazes. This is the same basket. It's just it's exciting to me though because I don't know.
It's
I'm
different.
excited. Yeah.
Well, did you
It's different.
used to do more of that? No.
I've been doing a little here and there, like in between wood firings, but this is the first time I'm actually doing more of it right now than the stoneware work. Yeah,
Great.
So,
Well, that's nice.
exciting. I think probably too because that kiln is new for me and it's computerized. So I probably wouldn't have attempted this in my old turn-up dial kiln. Now I feel like I made this investment in this new electric kiln that like this could be like
Commercially viable.
yes, and not just for bisking. Terracotta earthenware, the color when it comes out of the electric kiln at a certain temperature, it's a very kind of like a dark red color, brick, almost like a brick red, but very flat. Like there's no variation because it's from the electric kiln, so there's no atmosphere in there to give it any variation. It's just very stark, and there's something about that quality of sparseness and starkness that I really love, and part of me just wants to like fire everything in the electric kiln with no glaze and have it just be about the form. You know, there's also this other part of me that, you know, wants to experiment with color. And so applying the color to the pots that are fired in the electric kiln is very different because glaze, I'm using some commercial glazes, and those are brushed on rather than dipped or poured. So with electric firing at a certain temperature range, you have access to any color you could dream of. So putting myself in the position where I can try to make a body of work and have any color that I'm thinking of, I'm still trying to pare it down to just the basic earth colors that I love, like the deep yellow, the kind of grass green color, the color of the clay, which is like a beautiful earthy red color. And it's almost like the work has, you know, different, like it has changed clothing. Like the forms I'm making are a continuation of the forms that I've been making, but in the electric kiln they come out and it's like they have like a sharp little suit on, you know, rather than like if they come out of the wood kiln they have like their kind of casual clothes or something. I don't know. So with the earthenware wood fire, it'll be a different tone. Colors of the clay will be different. I'm not sure exactly what they'll look like. So, but I will approach it with the same mindset in that keeping my palette of color that I'm applying very minimal and having the clay, you know, shine through and have the variation. See how nicely the glaze melted and how toasty that slip is. I really like this color.
I love the combination.
Yeah, there's a little slight variation there and like a little halo of the wads, which I like that subtlety. Yeah, so I'm liking that. Yeah, and I really like the color of the clay. This is the type of earthenware I was going for.